Good evening, everyone. It's really great to see so many people out here on a dark Eastham, practically November night. The topic obviously is of interest. I'm thrilled to see that. I'm Roberta Longley, and I'm the chair of the Town of Eastham's Climate Action Committee. Our committee is sponsoring this evening's program in partnership with the library. By the way, this program is being recorded, and if you or anyone else that you know would like to hear it later, you'll be able to find it on the town website and local TV. I'm not sure how you access that, but it's there if you want to find it. We're very pleased to have Kristin Andres from the APCC with us this evening. But before I introduce her, I just wanted to share a little background on how this evening came about. Our Climate Action Committee is a town committee that was created about a year ago. And our primary charge is to advise the select board and to communicate with residents on ways that we can implement the town's commitment to reducing our carbon footprint, as well as finding ways to reduce the vulnerability of the town to potential devastating consequences from climate change. Tonight is the second of a three-part series of programs relating to climate action, meaning what we as individuals can do to combat climate change. Next Thursday evening, November 3rd, we're going to be again in this room, where we have a program called Meet Your Town Climate Action Committee. This is your opportunity to learn more about what we've been up to for the past year, and also talk with us, discuss with us your concerns and ideas about local climate action. Also, there's an email list back there. If you're interested in hearing more from us on occasion about what we are doing or programs, when you get a chance, please add your email address. All right. Kristin Andres is the Associate Director for Education at the APCC, also known as the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, which most of you know is one of the region's leading environmental advocacy organizations. Much of Kristin's work includes promoting eco-friendly land care practices and the use of native plants in the landscape. She accomplishes this through educational programs like this evening, and through the Living Landscape Laboratory, which is a demonstration garden at APCC's home in Dennis. All of her work is in keeping with her organization's focus on water quality protection, critical habitat preservation, and climate action. I know that Kristin influences in other ways through her involvement with many other organizations. She serves on numerous boards, or has served. And just to mention a few, the Ecological Landscape Alliance, Chatham's Friends of Trees, the Friends of Sylvan Gardens, and the Friends of Chatham Waterways. That's just naming a few. And if that isn't enough, Kristin writes a bi-weekly column for the Cape Cod Chronicle on topics of ecology and the environment. Along with being a native plant enthusiast, Kristin describes herself as slightly obsessed with observing and photographing nature, and strives to share her passionate appreciation for nature whenever possible. She plans to speak for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions. I understand the library closes at 8, so I think we'll have plenty of time to do that. Can you help me welcome Kristin Andres?
Well, I have lots of information to share with you this evening, so I better get going. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is terrific. Well, it's official. 2021 was the world's 6th warmest year on record, since we've been keeping those records since 1880. September was tied for the 5th warmest for the globe, and North America had its warmest September on record. And we know what that meant for us here. The impacts of climate change were evident this summer. heat waves, drought. I've been here for several decades now on Cape Cod, and I can tell you that this is the toughest, most drought-stricken summer that I've ever been here. Things were extremely crispy. And, for the state to declare Cape Cod to be in a level 3 critical drought was also pretty significant. Our groundwater levels are just depleted. We don't generally think about wildfires, except out west, but wildfires are an impact that we should be concerned about here. I'm not going to be getting into that this evening, but just wanted to make mention of that. So if you lived in Scituate back in 2016, this is what the reservoir looked like during that drought. And I remember 2016 because we had just moved to APCC's office, our residence. We'd been renting space for 48 years and finally bought a property in Dennis. And I was trying to establish our little meadow, and it didn't rain all summer. Now, if I lived in Scituate and I saw our water reservoir, they get their drinking water from this surface water reservoir, I'd be a little bit concerned when I got home that I might not get any water coming out of the tap. But here on the Cape, given that we draw our water from the ground, we don't really think about it quite as much as if it's that visual. Instead, we see these signs across every town over the last 2 years now, if not 3 summers. Some of it's because our water infrastructure is just not there yet to pump enough water. Think about our lifestyles. We're extremely water hungry these days in so many ways. Think about how it was when you were a kid and how your parents lived. There are many more, not everybody, but so many yards are irrigated. So many people have swimming pools. Our lifestyle, we shower every day, young folks anyway. Are showering every day. There's a lot more water usage than there used to be kind of in our earlier lifestyles. So anyway, we are faced with these lower groundwater levels due to lack of precipitation, which is the only way our groundwater gets recharged. But with warmer air means that there's more water within the air. And so when it does rain, we have these increased the intensity of the storms are much more severe, and we have flooding that occurs in places where it didn't used to flood before, or it's flooding in places very extreme where the stormwater systems that were designed based on rainfall precipitation from the 60s, they're just not designed to capture the several inches of rain in a short period of time that we're experiencing now. And perhaps, there's no stormwater system that would address this issue in the photo. So we know that, and we know that there are other climate impacts. When we talk about climate change, climate issues, these 3 words always come up. And so to mitigate means to take steps to reduce our carbon emissions. Adapt means to make adjustments in our behavior to deal with the impacts of climate change, and so we change our behavior, our practice, and design, whether it's architectural or otherwise, to deal with the changes in our environment that then result in building resiliency. And resiliency, of course, is that ability to bounce back after difficulties. So after a severe storm event, if we're properly adapted, it may not be quite as difficult getting back to normal. So these 3 key climate action terms can also apply to our landscapes, oddly enough. There's this thing called cumulative impact. So cumulative impact can be applied in many ways. We know we have water quality issues, and that's the cumulative impact of all of our septic systems over the many decades. Cumulative impact can also be positive. And so I love the tagline for Grow Native Massachusetts. It says, every garden matters and every landscape counts. And our landscapes have a role to play in supporting nature and in addressing climate change and our carbon footprint in many ways. So we'll dig right in with one of the most important things is that we all need to appreciate and love our trees more. Yes, I'm on Friends of Trees. Yes, I'm a tree hugger. But seriously, trees offer so much. So we'll start here. One of the major things that they offer is energy savings. They can cool land temperatures up to 10 degrees by shading our buildings, our streets, and by releasing the water vapor through their evapotranspiration. They can reduce our household's heating and cooling costs by up to 25%. And of course, they store carbon, that stuff we need to keep out of the air and keep in the ground. So they store it in their leaves, in their trunks, in their branches, and in their roots. In 1 year, an acre of mature tree absorbs about as much carbon dioxide as a car driven 26,000 miles. They're not to be underestimated for the amount of carbon held in their, in each of their cells. Just like all of us, we're all made of carbon. So some design considerations around trees. Plant deciduous trees. Deciduous trees are the ones that lose their leaves. Plant deciduous trees to the south and to the west, and that'll help keep your house cool in the summer and let the sun warm your home in the winter, and it reduces your energy use. Plant to shade your air conditioners. They'll use less electricity. A unit operating in the shade uses as much as 10% less electricity than one that's operating in the sun. Plant a windbreak to the north and the south. Again, you know when that cold northeast wind blows, which we get plenty of those winter storms, a windbreak can be very helpful. So leave those wild areas. I see lots of folks who like to clear their properties and then they plant in Leland cypress. A lot of the wild areas would do a much better job. And plant for the future. When we're talking about trees, anticipate the loss of trees to disease, storms, and natural plant succession. We all like kind of that immediate gratification, but think about planting some whips, which are just the little 1 to 2 foot little stems of a tree. A lot of times, like at Friends of Trees in Chatham, we do giveaways around Arbor Day. There may be other opportunities to get those, or maybe your organization wants to give away some trees, and they just cost a couple dollars a piece. They're great to plant as a nursery. You'll probably, none of us here are going to live to see them be 20-inch diameter trees, but it's planting for the future. And of course, there's so many other values of trees. They help clean the air. They grab the sediment and other particulate matter that may be blowing around in the air. They help with water quality through filtering through their roots as the water flows through the ground. They help with soil porosity and flood control because all of those tree roots help the water soak into the ground. There's a little airspace around each plant root, whether it's tree or any other kind of plant, and that is where the water soaks in to hydrate the tree, but also to soak through into the ground. And so that also helps with flood control. And of course, soil stabilization. Wildlife habitat, that's a whole other talk about the values of trees to our wildlife. They reduce urban crime, and the link at the bottom would explain all that. Washington, Department of Washington University has a study on that. Trees can be a community project. It's a great way to bring neighborhoods together to do tree plantings in a neighborhood. Maybe it's a public space or a shared space, and it's a great way to bring folks together and then to care and nurture those trees. And trees increase our property value and our quality of life. There's really nothing else like them. I'll stop. I could, again, do a whole new talk on trees. So look at this photograph. Picture yourself in the heat of the summer, one of these hot summer humid days, and how inviting this streetscape is. So trees are really the green infrastructure of our communities. We look at buildings, we look at awnings, we look at, lots of different characteristics that a community, either in its planning or maintenance, is cared about. Where there's a rubbish barrel or where somebody puts a parking space or whatever it may be. But think about the green infrastructure in your community and in your neighborhood. And I bet trees really make the big difference. They're so valuable. They make this an inviting space in an urban area. And they're just not to be, when you drive down the road and you say, oh, what's different? Oh my gosh, they cut that tree down. You lose that canopy, you lose the whole feel, that whole comfort perhaps even that you might have felt, or the enjoyment of having those shaded trees over a roadway. So trees are really important as green infrastructure in our communities. Just another design tip that I think is really important, and we're kind of lucky here. We can moderate temperatures on our property. You hear about heat sinks, in these hot days in cities, dark pavement, asphalt parking lots, they're heat sinks, and they make our urban areas so much hotter. In ways to deal with that is when we're, particularly in our own residential properties, is to use cool pavement, use light-colored driveways. It may be, whatever. It could be concrete or pavers or something that using light colors. We're lucky here on Cape Cod, we can do shell driveways. How cool is that? You can do shell and native stone. You can do native stone. But the black asphalt, obviously, that's something that really holds the heat. And so to minimize, again, that heat sink, look for reflective materials. And minimize the heat-holding stonework. I think the horse is kind of out of the barn here. I've been on stonework, and there's an awful lot of beautiful stonework around Cape Cod. It started up about 20 years ago, and it hasn't lost its appeal, but it can be really kind of a heat-holding thing to really, if you're trying to minimize the heat temperature around your property, minimizing the stonework is one thing to do. So now a little bit about our traditional landscapes as we've known them. I hope nobody knows this house. It's no reflection on whoever owns it. I happen to have this picture in my cache for a long time. Lots of lawn, typical traditional landscape, right? Lots of lawn, and here in Cape Cod, a lot of hydrangeas. They're non-native. I don't want to bash hydrangeas, but they're non-native. They're from China, and in China, I'm told by people who traveled there, you see them growing on the banks of the rivers. So they like this heavy, misty, moist locations. So they're really water hogs. And we plant them, where everybody loves them, so they're planted everywhere. They want to be in the shade, and they need water. So if people who love hydrangeas and want them to look good likely are irrigating them. So they're water hogs. Lawns are water hogs for those people who want to have turf lawns. So this traditional landscape is high maintenance and generally takes a lot of water. And did you know that there are 40 million acres, probably more than that, of lawn in the U.S.? That's about the size of New England. Nationwide, landscape irrigation accounts for about 1/3 of all residential water use. Now, obviously, that's on average, and it's estimated, but for folks who traditionally have irrigated lawn and wash their cars outside and have a swimming pool and have, think of any other reason for outside water use, but a lot of it goes to our landscapes, these traditional landscapes. And the lawn industry is based on fossil fuels. Fertilizers are made using fossil fuels, and of course, most of the equipment that gets used is still gas-powered. So maintenance choices. We do have some choices. We can kick those gas-powered equipment aside. There are other alternatives now. We have battery-operated lawnmowers now. Anybody in the audience have one of those? Yep. They're pretty easy to use, aren't they? They're lightweight. Gosh, all you gotta do is push a button. Don't have to wonder what to do with the old gas at the end of the season or work on the carburetor or whatever it might be. They're pretty easy. There are also electric mowers out there. I use one myself. The cord can be a little bit of a nuisance, but it's certainly possible. You don't want to do 2 acres with a corded lawnmower, but they're so clean and easy and lightweight and easy to use. And of course, the other option is a push mower, you know. If we think about reducing our lawns, we can do that. And reducing your lawn is a great thing to do. So think about what lawn you really use. Now, you know, turf lawn, fescues are really a good thing if you need a place to walk, to play sports, a place for the dogs to run and do their thing. There's really not much that can really equate to that, to the traffic and effort and use that a lawn can take. But quite often we have, like that earlier picture, we have these expanses of lawns that nobody walks on. And in fact, probably some people are told not to walk on that lawn. So think about reducing the lawn. Think about what lawn you have. Maybe you still like to have a big area. Or maybe you live with someone who says, I like my lawn and do not take it away from me. If you can't give up your lawn, then make it a Cape Cod lawn. Let's, get away from the chemicals and the pesticides and the irrigation. Cape Cod lawn is a thing. I guess I'm an old timer because I know what a Cape Cod lawn is. I've known it since I first came here. So a Cape Cod lawn's whatever grows. It's really just a rough lawn. Moss is cool. Boy, if you've got moss in your lawn, and Cape Cod lawns can be very diverse. Moss, broadleaf plants, holy cow, you could have plantains in there. Yeah, a little crabgrass, yeah, but other stuff will squeeze out that crabgrass. Violets, you can add clover, Dutch white clover is not native, but, you can add that. That'll help green up the area. But there are some other things that you can also plant. If you're just looking for you just need some open green space. There are lots of terrific, this is entitled Lawn Alternatives, but these are really open green, sort of carpeting plants or things that are low to the ground covers. You probably wouldn't want to tread over the wild ginger. You might want to walk on the wild strawberry. That would be okay. But these aren't really lawn alternatives. They are open green space alternatives for covering the ground. And so there are lots of terrific native plants here. Wild strawberry, barren strawberry, Pennsylvania sedge, golden groundsel, bearberry, American ginger, hay-scented fern, prairie dropseed, that's a grass, purple love grass, foam flower. There's lots of others. This is Pennsylvania sedge. It's kind of a cool look, isn't it? These are lots of little plants. It grows in the wild. It likes dry shade. So once you get established, if you like the look, it flops over. It gets up to be about 8 inches, and it just flops over. Some people have tried to mow it. I don't know why, because I think this is the beauty of it, how it's just kind of flowing hair. So it's a cool option. Think about meadows in the design. Now, meadows aren't really 100% maintenance free, but you're not out there mowing every week. Meadows change. You have to have expectations if you're thinking about going to meadows. You have to change your expectations and do your homework and understand that meadows change. They morph. They don't stay the same. This is our meadow at the office. This is the one that I watered to germination back in 2016. The first summer, there were blossoms that first August, and it was partridge pea was the predominant plant, which is a native annual. And they have these big, bright yellow flowers that the bees just love. And so immediately from May, the time that we seeded, and by end of July, August, we had flowers, and the meadow, our little meadow, was alive with bumblebees. It was miraculous. The second year, it looked like this. It was black-eyed Susans. These were in the mix. They took a year to germinate and get established. It didn't look like this the next summer. The next summer was some goldenrod. The grasses started taking over, and I don't have a picture of it in this, but right now we've got lots of oxeye sunflowers. and they all nicely march along the ramp there. They were in the seed mix. They weren't planted on purpose, but somehow they like that location. So it's been a constant thing of change, and that's kind of fun for people who like to really be out there in the garden and be observant and see what's happening. Meadows are really fun to see what's changing, what's coming in on its own, what shows up. But you do need to keep an eye out for weeds, so you need to know your plants and make sure that mugwort stays out. So a good climate change thing or a way to address climate change and address carbon emissions is to avoid churning the soil. So I found this very interesting when I first learned this. I had just never thought about it. In the soil, we've got plant roots, carbon. We've got soil organisms. They're made of carbon as well. When we churn the soil, those soil organisms die and they respirate, and that carbon gets released into the atmosphere. So this is why we're trying to get big agricultural or big farms to leave the stub. I don't know if anybody's from farming areas. I don't think we have signs like that around here, but out even when you get into New York State and further west, and you see promotions through the local ag districts, they're getting farmers to leave the stubble. So let's not, we don't plow it up every year and leave it fallow. We leave the corn stalks after they've harvested. They're left in the field, or they're planting cover crops. Same can apply to your own little landscapes. So when you decide that you're going to get rid of some of that grass, don't get a rototiller and churn up all that grass, because you're releasing some carbon, and also you're bringing up weed seed, and you're probably going to make a mess for yourself. So sheet mulching is really, we've done it, and I would recommend it for this purpose. Cardboard, or you can buy craft paper, that rolled paper that people put down on new houses' flooring to protect the flooring. You can get that. You can go organic too. I've seen organic paper. That's probably much too expensive for this project, but so cardboard. Take all the staples and the plastic, tape off. Mow the grass really short, like scalp it, put the cardboard down, wet it, and then get about 4 to 6 inches of, whether it's compost, or ideally you want like shredded shrubs, or shredded vegetation, or wood mulch. Try not to go for, I wouldn't recommend doing like the hemlock stuff that comes in from Maine. Too expensive, and then kind of your carbon footprint is kind of blown right there by purchasing that. Find a local purveyor or tree company that's either got some composted wood chips, or maybe they've just recently shredded some stuff. So we've done both, and you can plant shrubs and just put the cardboard around them. Once that's down, we've seeded right on top. Within a few weeks, that cardboard breaks down. So it's a lot to say about that. And then there's videos online, and you can learn more about how to do that. So instead of making wood mulch the star of the landscape, make it green living mulch. We tend to, we're kind of crazy in this country with wood mulch, or at least in New England. I don't know what the West Coast does, probably nothing, but wood mulch seems to be like the thing. And if we're gardeners and we really enjoy plants, it should be more about the plants. So less about the wood mulch. Of course, there's some carbon footprint usually with some of that stuff, like I say, the hemlock mulch. So let's do more plants. So when I say green living mulch, it means planting in layers. So the first layer are some of those ground cover plants, might be sedges, like in the very, I don't know if I want to touch the screen here. Little sedges here in the front, some lower growing plants, and then some of your perennials that are more upright, to shrubs. The next layer might be some understory trees like sassafras or redbud, and then your canopy trees, something bigger like a maple. The idea is that we have more plants in our landscapes, more carbon, more roots in the soil. Let the plants knit together. They'll help keep the soils moist. They'll help shade out weeds. They make I think diversity is really the spice of life, as they say, and ecosystems that are high in biodiversity are stable and resilient. And the same does go for our landscape. So I don't know if any of you recall, or maybe you've seen historic pictures back when American elms lined all of our green spaces in our old villages, and then the Dutch elm disease came through and trees were wiped out all in one. So planting in monocultures is never a good idea, and landscape architects that work in public spaces now, at least the smart ones, are never going to do that again. They're never going to plant all the same species because that's just devastating when you lose a species due to a specific disease or pathogen. So in our own landscapes, let's choose plants with similar cultural requirements that suit the site and the existing soils, because the idea is to plant for the long term. Get plants that are going to fit together and that you're not going to have to be churning that soil. We want them to be long-lived. Think about trees. When you choose the trees that you choose, you might want to think about choosing oaks and other long-lived trees as opposed to some of the ornamentals that are probably going to die out in 20 years as opposed to living 100 years. And when we allow these plants to grow together, it helps reduce our need for weeding. I grew up, my mother still weeds to this every day because she is the old school, so she weeds around every little plant, and it's a lot of effort. And, we could all reduce our energy by just needing to edit and letting the plants fill the space. And this is a great tip from Sue Reed and Ginny Steibolt that is kind of hard for those of us who like to visit nurseries, and we just like that immediate gratification of buying that pretty flat of plants. I just need 6 of those. But annual plants that we are enticed to buy all the time, like the begonias in this picture, they have a big footprint themselves in their production, and in our public spaces, this is obviously a public space in this photo, we see them used and then removed, and then the next season of annuals goes in, or the next color palette. That's quite a waste. So it's just something to think about. If that's kind of been the pattern, maybe the pattern can change, and we can just minimize our cost for one. Like, let's plant with perennials, and kind of one and done, or at least for a longer period of time. And then we get to the native species, which of course is, I always say, the true proven winners. Those of you who go to nurseries, you know that trademark name. They are the true proven winners. They're well adapted to the Cape or to wherever they are native to. But our native species here for our ecoregion are well adapted to the Cape, to our thin, poor soils. Many of our native plants are drought and salt spray tolerant, which is a real plus. That bottom picture there, that's beach plum, quintessential Cape Cod. Everybody should have beach plum in their landscape. If beach plum and bayberry can live out in the dunes, what more difficult conditions are those? Sandy, any organics? Probably not. And then salt spray, and who knows about rain. So beach plums, and if you have beach plums, I thought this was an interesting fact. If you haven't had fruit on your beach plum, then you want to buy another one. They're not dioecious, which means there's not a male and a female beach plum like there are in the holly families, where you have to have a male holly and a female to have the berries. But beach plum need to be fertilized by from the pollen of another beach plum of a different genetic makeup. And so if you really want to hope to have beach plums, if you're going to go out and buy them, buy a beach plum from one retail nursery and then go way somewhere else and buy another one. A lot of the nurseries who buy from the same grower, the propagation of those beach plums may be genetically the same, right? So anyway, just an interesting thing I thought about beach plums. So, and our native plants, most importantly, support our local ecology. I find that this is the most important reason to plant native plants. But many of them are also really deep-rooted. They're beautiful. They're really not fussy, and they provide that sense of place. They remind us of where we are, that we're in Cape Cod or New England. And so a little bit about the roots. I love to use this slide in every presentation I do because it's accurate. It's not really just somebody's made-up idea. There are scientists that actually measure the roots, the depth of roots of plants. So the red line that crosses there is 5 feet. There's a scale, a 1-foot scale going on the vertical axes. And I point out the 5 feet because I'm 5 feet. So, so think about the top of the soil here at my head and at the floor. Many of those roots of those plants are well below me. The ones with the red arrows pointing, I've just pointed out, these are all prairie plants, but the ones I've pointed out in red arrows are those that are native here. So we have little blue stem grass. There's coneflower, sort of, not really native here, but we use it a lot in our gardens. Little blue stem, switchgrass. Look, it's got crazy down to 15 feet below the ground. Prairie dropseed. So again, the importance of all these roots within the soil is that they're all holding carbon in the soil. They're keeping it underground and not in the atmosphere to warm our atmosphere. And they're also making that the soil porous so that the water can enter the ground and get into our groundwater. And it's also all those roots are feeding microbes that then feed the plants that help take up the nutrients before it gets to our groundwater, like the nitrogen. And then this little guy over here on the left, that's Kentucky bluegrass. Doesn't have a lot going on, just a few inches of roots. So less value. Lawn does hold carbon, but you can see, it's just not that much. Our native plants support our pollinators. Our pollinators are at risk. 1 in 4 of our wild bees, are at risk of extinction. There's our birds. We've heard recent State of the Birds report. A lot of our birds we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years, and the report that came out, State of the Birds report in the last 2 weeks, said that 70 species are at the tipping point of extinction in the next 50 years or less. So we really need to think more about native plants that support our insects, that support our birds, and other local food webs that are invisible to us. There is a very important role for native plants. And while that can be overwhelming, what's native, what's going to live on Cape Cod, what should I put in my garden, we came up with this, it's called a native plant finder, but it's really a website where it'll give you some ideas of what plants do well. So you go in and there's a bunch of filters and you can pick, the website is capecodnativeplants.org, and there's some stickers out back on the table that you can pick up to remind you. capecodnativeplants.org. There are about 100 plants in the website right now, in the database. We'll keep adding to it. They're not all indigenous to Cape Cod, but they are either within our ecoregion. They may be native to Pennsylvania, but they still will do really well here in our gardens. And I tried not to be a purist about this because, heck, we've got so many non-natives in our landscapes. I think if we just need more native stuff here that are going to support our wild bees many are specific to them, are specialists on these plants. So anyway, hope you take advantage of it and take a look at it and play around with it and see what's there. And we give you information, and there's also PDFs on each one of them you can print out if you want to take it to the store with you. Water in the landscape. Hey, we're so lucky here in the Northeast. We get to harvest rain from our roofs. Out west, don't have that option. There are water rights that belong to others. But we get to harvest rain from our gutter downspouts. This belongs to someone in the audience here, this photo. I saw you, Rick. APCC has been selling rain barrels. We have not selling them ourselves, but we have a rain barrel program. And it's just a fun way to capture free water off the roof to water your flower boxes or your potted plants. It's also kind of a mindful exercise. It reminds you about our water resource and just handling how many people have used watering cans. You know, we get so so quick to just flip on a switch or let the irrigation system do a thing. So there's a little Zen stuff going on with using a rain barrel and a watering can. You can have a whole bunch of rain barrels hooked together. You can think about a cistern. So think about harvesting water and using that. The water that we pull out of the ground, obviously there's energy expended if it's town water. And if it's town water, it's being treated with salts for the pH, and your plants don't really want that. So it's just an option, something to think about. This is kind of a fun idea. Reduce, recycle, and repurpose in your garden. This is our repurposed garden, I guess is what I call it, our edible garden at the office. We had to cut a tree down, so rather than haul it away, we used it for raised beds. And then we kind of had this open pallet at the end of the shed right there. So we used some dead bittersweet vines from an AmeriCorps project, and AmeriCorps volunteers helped put those up there, and it was a trellis for our beans. So there's lots of, and there are books out there on with creative ideas. So why spend money? You know, if you can repurpose and reuse, and it's just kind of a fun way to do it. So these masked bandits helped us plant perennial vegetables. This is edible landscapes. So a couple years ago, during the pandemic, the worst of it, we planted some perennial vegetables because they keep on giving. So another way something to think about. It's nice to have your own vegetable garden. Again, it's just a way to reduce kind of keeping it home and local, like going to your farmer's market as opposed to buying something that's been shipped from Mexico. Trying to grow things locally is a good way to minimize your carbon footprint. And the perennial vegetables, I'm sure some of you have an idea of what those might be, like asparagus is one, fennel, we have sea kale, and so there's a lot of other, Egyptian walking onions. Those guys will take over if you don't watch them. You got to eat them. And there's some other funky things that they brought to us. So also something to think about. Compost and keep nutrients on site. I know this is a hard one for a lot of us because we don't have the time, but it's really important to do this. Some of our transfer stations will accept food compost. That's probably the next best thing. But the worst thing you can do is just throw it out. You know, we try to recycle it. I think it's like 29% of our waste is from food. So if we can keep our kitchen scraps, those that are compostable, and compost leaves and any yard clippings, if that's how you manage your yard, composting is really important because we want to grow our soils. This is what, we need to get rid of the fertilizers and grow our soils. Compost will help us do that. We want to protect our soils. When we say we don't want to churn them, we don't want to leave them exposed. We want them to be covered, either with cover crops or chopped straw or salt marsh hay, depending on the size of your garden space. But we don't want to leave soils exposed. So the worst thing you can do is blow all the leaves away from your garden and your plants and your trees, leaving exposed soil over the winter. So leaves the roots exposed to the cold temperatures as well as the soil organisms. And of course, rototilling just also disturbs all of that life in the soil. So leaving the leaves, it's an important message for this time of year. Leave the leaves, leave the seeds for the birds, leave the stems. Lots of our insects overwinter in those stems, particularly some of our wild bees. And also the insects that are sometimes in those stems are food for winter chickadees and other birds. And they'll also help us build soil health by leaving the leaves. Okay, so if leaving the leaves, Ideally, you'd like to leave them where they fall. Or you can rake them into garden beds, or you can use them to create new beds. Some people may not be able to deal with that. You know, you might be a neatnik, or maybe you live with a neatnik. But understand that the leaves have a purpose to the trees. They're helping recycle some nutrients that are left in them. They're also important. They're made of lignin, and it feeds the soil organisms. They also, again, protect the soil, protect the roots of the plants, but they also protect overwintering insects like this mourning cloak. The mourning cloak butterfly overwinters under the leaves as a winged butterfly. There are other butterflies that overwinter in the leaves in their pupa stage, like skippers. So when we haul all the leaves away, all of that life that was feeding on the tree above and then is completing its life cycle over the winter under the leaves, if all those leaves get hauled away, so do they. The leaves also help protect bumblebees, queen bumblebees that are in the ground. Well, other bees are also ground nesters, and the leaves help protect them. Okay, let me zoom ahead here. So on to the last issue, and this is to manage stormwater. This is important. So we talk about drought and heat waves, and then we've got this other extreme of the deluge when we have these major rainstorms. And so we get puddling and we get overwhelmed stormwater systems. This is a catch basin. It's covered with leaves. If this was in your neighborhood, it would be good to go clean that out to make sure it functions. But we need to manage stormwater, and we need to manage stormwater on our own properties because, guess what? There's a cumulative impact. In this picture, look to the top right there. There's a driveway there on a slope. All the water that hits that driveway, whatever's on the driveway, whether it's litter, dog feces, whatever has settled there, all of that comes down the driveway, enters onto the public roadway, and ends up in the lower left-hand corner there, which is a paved area that takes all that water in one big slug down into which is near a wetland, down to a low area. All of the stormwater, as far as you can see in the picture, all of the rainwater that hits that roadway and any other driveways up around the bend that look like the one in the picture, and behind me in the photo, as far as that roadway goes up to a slope, all of the water that hits that roadway all comes down to this one location. And this is not how we should be managing our stormwater. It's a public management issue. We could help relieve that. Some towns may have laws on the books to eliminate driveways like that, but whether they're enforced or not is another issue. So it's something to think about in your own property. If you've got a situation like this where you're spilling stormwater, rainwater out onto the roadway or into a pond, there's some steps that you can do to ameliorate that, which I don't have time to get into fully tonight. One option, instead of those hard surfaces, to do permeable surfaces like porous pave or pertcrete or permeable pavers. On the right is an asphalt driveway. This is our driveway that we inherited. And then we installed the porous pave, which is to the left, and it's a permeable surface, which means the water flows right through the surface. When the rain hits it, it flows right through. So there's no puddling, there's no black ice. It's made of recycled tires in this case. There are other materials that function in the same way. But one quick little story is when we installed this, we had a general contractor, we had a excavating contractor who then subbed it out. So there was a little bit of messaging that needed to occur between the three parties. It didn't happen. And when the landscape company knew that it needed to be 3/4 inch stone, but when we came back, this is what we had for the base. 3/4 inch stone, but then it was covered with stone dust, blue stone dust that he had wet down, and so now it was going to be like concrete and hard. So nice firm surface for a parking area, but there was nothing about this that was going to be permeable. So they had to remove it because we wanted our parking area to perform as a permeable surface. This is the traditional way, right, that we do parking areas and patios and driveways, is with this very hard impermeable base. What we wanted was 3/4-inch stone that was compacted, but that had air spaces below, between the stones. So this is what the base looked like, and then they trowel on the porous pave. Same with Perkcrete. This is Cape Cod Ready Mix. This is their permeable concrete surfacing. And you see there in the picture, this is what happens. The water hits it and it flows right through. It's the same thing that happens with our recycled tire surface. It's only a couple inches thick, but the base, the key is that the base is compacted 10 to 12 inches of 3/4-inch stone. And our landscape contractors here, it's something for them to learn. Not enough people know about it. They should really get certified and understand the purpose for the function. But the idea is that we keep the water that hits our land and we allow it to soak into the ground where it falls. That's kind of key to, again, not contributing to the big stormwater problem that we all face. These are some other surfaces. Permeable pavers. The blocks themselves are not permeable, but it's, again, the base and the spaces between them that allows the water to flow through. Then there's these other little concrete things where you can either put gravel or grass. These photos look really great with grass. If you're not using the parking area, it may actually look like that. I'm not sure how successful they are here in New England looking like that. But they have been used, so it gives you a hard surface to drive your vehicle, but yet there's enough space there for the water to soak in. And then the last thing I'll just leave with you, which again, this could be a talk in itself, is about rain gardens. So capturing stormwater runoff generally from a roof is what a rain garden is for. It's really just a garden in a depression. And the water from a roof gutter downspout is directed to it. We're not creating a wetland or anything. We're just allowing the water to go into an area where it can spread out a little bit and soak slowly into the ground, and where those soil organisms can help break down the nitrogen and any other issues, or if there's any pollutants that they're bound up in the soils there before they get into our groundwater. So rain gardens can be really fun. They can be really a part of your landscape, and they're not super. You don't have to be an engineer to put them in. Some rain gardens do need engineering, but for a situation like this, they don't. So this is ours in action right after we planted it. You don't have to have the gutter water spill out onto that gravel trench. Like, we just wanted to show that the water actually got down to the depression. You can have an extension of the gutter that directs the water there. Because in most cases, your soils are pretty sandy, so you really want the water to get where the plants are, away from your foundation. It's like watching paint dry, isn't it? There you go. So that's our rain garden. So in summary, plant more trees, preserve trees. We have to love our trees more. Minimize our lawn area, and when you've got lawn, make it a Cape Cod lawn. Choose native species, plant for diversity, leave the leaves, stems, and seeds, conserve water, recycle, repurpose, reuse, compost, minimize that soil disturbance and leave wild areas wherever you can, manage stormwater, and work with nature instead of against it. And this is the book on climate-wise landscaping. I recommend it to look at other ideas that you may not have thought about. Thank you. Any questions?
Can you use newsprint or newspaper for mulch and or for compost?
Yep. Yes, you could use that for mulch, like to do the sheet mulching. when you're sheet mulching, you just want to make sure that it's thickened, you have several layers of it, and that you're not letting any light in. You want to overlay the edges of it, because we're really trying to keep the light from getting to the grass that's below and smother it.
How about like wooden shingles, like leftover from a siding job?
Well, you do want, if you're the reason for sheet mulching would be so that you're changing it, putting it into planting beds. So I would think the shingles would inhibit any root growth getting to the soil.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah, the idea of the cardboard or the newspaper is that it's really going to decompose and start to break down pretty soon, so you can plant on top and or through it.
I'll just have to find another way of getting rid of my shingles.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm wondering if the permeable driveways can be snow plowed. Does the plow dig them up?
Our porous pave would require a shoe on the plow. That's what they tell me. I don't know if anybody bothers putting a shoe on their plow. We didn't, for our space, we just use like a snow blower would work, and really just go out and shovel. If you had a big area, I think the percrete, I'm sure you can plow that. But the porous pave, you could peel it up if the plow caught it.
Thanks very much for your talk. Are butterfly bushes native species, and are those milkweed pods that you see around randomly, can you reseed those in your garden?
Butterfly bush is not native. It too is from Asia. Many of them are invasive. I've seen them go crazy on coastal banks, that we'll never be able to get rid of them. So I've seen that locally here on Cape Cod get out of control. So I say don't if you have butterfly bush and it's not doing that, then maybe you're okay, but I would never buy a butterfly bush. I wouldn't recommend that. Better to have native plants to offer nectar, because they're also then going to be part of the life cycle in another way, like milkweed. Yes, you can plant the milkweed seeds. So right now, milkweed seeds they're doing their thing, they're blowing around, they're going to land, and they need to go over a winter to really be able to germinate in the spring. That's what nature is going to do with them. If you have seeds that you want to germinate yourself, you can stick them in the freezer or refrigerator and sprout them in the spring, if you want to do that, if you want to know where they are. Broadcasting milkweed seed, it's kind of hit or miss. So if you know that you want to have 6 milkweed plants, like right there next year, then I would plant them into a pot. You can actually plant them into a pot and just leave the pot outside over the winter, or whatever your container is. And just milkweeds don't germinate really till June. So just when you think you're gonna throw it out and then they just didn't make it, don't do it. Hang on. So they're pretty good about germinating. It's just they take longer. Milkweeds don't come up out of the ground until June.
So I have a question. So I'm not going to rake my leaves this year on my yard, right? So I'm hoping my neighbors don't give me a hard time, right? There's always that peer pressure.
You can explain why you're doing it.
But come the spring or late spring, what do I do with them? Do I leave them all over my yard? So that's all I want to know is
Sure.
I'm cool the winter, but then what happens come May?
Well, these are all choices. Everybody, I'm not saying that everybody's got to do all these things and they have to do it a certain way at a certain time. These are just things to consider. We all have different thresholds of what our landscape lifestyle is. We'll call it that. At my house, I leave all the leaves. They blow around. They catch in the shrubs and in my perennial plants, and I leave them there. because they're mulch for the next summer. They're there to help the rainfall slowly soak into the ground. I mean, there's so much wonderful thing about leaving them. Again, if you feel like you need to clean something up, or maybe you want to rake them off the grass, maybe you don't like them because they're still on the lawn, you can mulch mow now and just, they'll break up into small pieces and they'll feed the soil organisms that way. Or you rake them off the lawn in the spring and put those leaves into your compost pile. Just never take the leaves away. They're so important. There's nothing like leaf mulch, If I could find leaf mulch from someone who did that, it's just a wonderful thing to be able to add to your yard, particularly if you don't have the trees that are producing them. Yeah.
So I imagine that if you leave the leaves on the lawn and you want a Cape Cod lawn, that's just going to make it happen faster, right? So, because
Yeah.
I've been trying to get rid of my lawn. So I just wanted to ask about
Yeah.
that.
We don't, it's a unique situation that I've never seen on Cape Cod where we've got such heavy leaves that the grass is not gonna, and everybody has complained over the years, or I've always heard about, oak leaves, they don't break down. Well, they do eventually, and they are part of our pitch pine oak plant community here. There's, again, a lot of lignin in those oak leaves, and they're feeding lots of organisms. And yes, maybe it takes 2 years for them to break down, but they're not probably going to be smothering your lawn like if you were under a heavy canopy of maple leaves that are really thick over. But still, perennials will still come up through that anyway.
Hello.
Yep.
This fall, Orleans passed in their town meeting an initiative to minimize the application of fertilizers. Can we do that Cape-wide? Can we do it statewide? Can we do it nationwide? What's your opinion on fertilizers? How can we move in the right direction on this issue?
We need to do it regionally. I think that's probably our best bet, but it's going to take some legislative action and some advocacy. I think we're going to, we need to, that's for another department at at APCC. But we are talking about it at APCC and thinking about how we can do that, because it does need to be a regional thing. It's great that Orleans has done that, and that we're all, other communities are talking about that, because with that voice, we can get the attention of those decision makers that can make it possible for us to do that locally.
I've been trying to avoid buying plants from the garden centers that have neonicotinoids, whatever
thanks.
that word is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Neonicotinoids.
Yeah, and I have no idea how to find out what plants to avoid, or what stores to avoid, or what brands to avoid.
Yeah.
Is there any way to find out?
Well, right now it's ask your nursery retail person, the owner, do you know if these plants are grown without neonics? There's neonicotinoids, for folks who don't know, are systemic pesticides that have negative impacts on pollinators. Even the pesticide is in the plant, so even when the plant has nectar, or maybe there's dew that has come from the plant, can have some maybe not acute impacts, but can have negative impacts on pollinators, either disorienting them or, may not be immediate mortality, but it's not good for them. So we don't want to buy these plants to attract pollinators only to then kill them. So there has been a big push for growing plants without neonics. Some of the plant sales, I'll say APCC's native plant sale, we buy from North Creek Nurseries, which is a wholesale company, and they grow without neonics. Some of your retail places will know what you're talking about, and they can say, yes, we know, we buy from these growers, and they've told us that they don't use neonics. But plants, we don't necessarily know how many people have handled, how many middlemen there are, and So it's hard to know for sure. So it's just like know your farmer, know your grower, know your nurseryman, your horticulturist. So, but it's a good question to keep asking, and retail nurseries will pick up on that. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Kristin. I'm really glad that you brought up so much about trees at the beginning, and I'm aware that if we all planted like 6 trees in our lifetime, if everybody was able to do that, we could really solve a lot of the climate problem. But I'm also hearing a lot about just massive scaling up of tree planting, and concerned that that's just, they're not cared for then, and then they just all die. And I wonder, when we think about the town of Eastham or any of our town climate action committees, what advice do you have for us for larger tree planting?
Just from my experience in Chatham, Friends of Trees, that's what we do. We plant memorial trees, and we plant trees in other public spaces. We run out of places to plant them. There aren't a lot of public spaces to plant. It's hard to believe, but it is difficult. I can tell you one of the things that is important is to advocate for trees that are already here. There's the shade tree law, which does protect trees on certain roadways that your town planning board should know about, and you should have a tree warden that's also watching that type of thing. And there are hearings when a tree on a public roadway within a road layout is going to propose to be cut by the adjacent property owner, and the tree warden is going to be holding a hearing on that. You might want to show up and say, you know what, isn't there something else we can do besides take this tree down? Or if that tree has to go because it's a danger, maybe the homeowner or the entity who's taking it down can plant more trees somewhere else. An example we did in Chatham with Eversource, we had to, interestingly enough, there was a solar array that went in, a small solar array, and they had to hook up to the grid. So Eversource says, well, the only way we can do it is to put these new poles along Middle Road, and it's going to require us taking out 60 trees. But the good news is the solar array went into an old pit, an old excavating pit, so there weren't any trees taken down necessarily for the installation of the solar array, but hooking it up along the road layout to the grid. So Friends of Trees got involved, and we worked with Eversource, and they were great. They replanted, we worked with them on native species, didn't plant back oak trees that were going to get in the way of the wires 20 years from now, but we did get some really great natives, and they've been maintaining them and watering them this whole summer and the next year and the next year. So mitigating when trees have to come down is really important, and advocating for that, those trees that are our green infrastructure is super important.
Hi. First off, thanks for a terrific presentation. Learned a lot tonight. Thought I knew everything, but kidding. Anyways, I was intrigued about the collection of rainwater and those barrels, and just wondering, what do you need to do in order to get something like that going, even on a small scale? And secondly, do we need to walk around that can, or can we hook the hose up to that and be a little more time effective?
Yep. It's just rain barrels are just a passive way to capture water. So if your garden is downhill of your rain barrel, that's good. All is not lost, though. If and if you don't want to use a watering can, if you wanted to use a submersible pump, you can get a submersible pump, hook a hose to that. I've done that. And then if you really want to get fancy, and I haven't figured this out, get a little solar panel to run your submersible pump. If you're that handy with that kind of thing. Yeah, rain barrels are, they're cool. They're not the answer to everything, but they, if you can wash your boots off. There's times in the garden with 2 dogs I need to wash my boots off, and the rain barrel's right there. So I don't know if that helps. Okay. Yeah.
I've been told that they're locking the doors in 15 minutes, so we have time for one quick question.
It's interesting how you emphasize the need for trees. I don't think the towns have gotten the memo on that, though, because just today on Nauset Road in Eastham, across from the senior center, they're putting in this huge road to access, I guess, to the wells, to the ancillary wells, and there's already a road there, right near it, and they're taking down, I don't know, I'd say, yeah, it's unbelievable how many trees they're taking down. It's just, the road's about 40 yards wide, and I don't know who approved it or whether there was any hearings about it, but it's really, I mean, you talk about how it affects climate and stuff.
Right.
Terrible.
Yep, trees are cleared every day that we have no say over. So I think in our communities, when we do have a say, whether it's through a tree warden's hearing or on our own properties or advocating in some other way, you know, protecting our trees is really important. I agree. A lot of people, you know, we look at land and we just say it's there to be used. The general consensus is it's there to be used and trees are dispensable. But when you think about a tree, an oak tree that's about this big, you know, 10, 12 inches in diameter, that tree's 30 to 40 years old. Like, we're never going to see that, you know. Well, I'm not going to probably be around then. Yeah, we need to spread the love for our trees. I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. Terrific program. So happy to have you.